Well, welcome. Hello, everybody. Welcome to How To Tuesday. And welcome back if you've been here before. How To Tuesday is Park University Library's weekly webinar series. And this week I will be your host, Finn Severum, Resident Communications and Outreach Specialist here at Park University Library. Um, I did a little bit of an introduction before I started recording, but I have been the artist for the Park University Library for the past couple of years, and I went to school, studied graphic design, so I have a little bit of experience in the topic. Um, Art programs have looked similar to what they have in the past, and we'll go over a few that you're probably familiar with, one in particular. But let's first start by describing what we're going to go over professional and free art programs, and we're also going to be talking about protecting your art, the latter half of this presentation. So, let's start off with what is digital art. The Oxford Learner Dictionary defines digital art as art that is created using computers and other digital media. That includes illustration, animation, 3D modeling, to name a few. If you draw with your finger on your Instagram stories to like draw a little picture, you're technically a digital artist too. So the big program that a lot of people know is the Adobe Suite. So the big one is Photoshop, which is image editing, and people also draw in that program as well. Illustrator is like vector art, making 3D shapes that you can scale up and down. You can also make illustrations in it as well, but it's a little bit more technical. And InDesign, which is a text formatting. So if you want to make a book, if you want to make a magazine, anything like that, moving blocks of text around, that's what you would use InDesign for. So, um, Adobe is established as the standard, and a lot of you probably use Adobe programs for your classes. Very robust. They've been around for a long time, but they're not always the most feasible option depending on what you want to create. And it's not super intuitive for people to pick up. I'm sure, as you've noticed, if you've opened up the app, and there's usually a lot of um, stuff that people only know if they know the shortcuts for things. There can be a few barriers to get into the program. So we'll go into that a little bit later. But we'll start off by describing, oh, and here's an example of a application that isn't Photoshop, but it looks very similar and it operates pretty much the same. And we'll go into what that program is later. So we're going to go over open source and closed source. So what open source is it's publicly available to everyone, and it's yours whenever you download it. So the pros of open source is the low cost. It's usually free. Sometimes it does cost one thing, but that is your cost to own it. Customization, there's a lot of plugins. You can kind of mix and match and homebrew what works best for you, make your own shortcuts, that kind of thing. There's also a large community support network. So there's a lot of forums of people who are also creating things, and they figure out shortcuts or like, hey, there's this cool thing that you can like make and make so that your art program knows how to do this as a shortcut so you can make this quicker. And the big thing is that there's transparency about what the programs offer. So you know exactly what things are going to do. You know um, that exactly how the application works. So it's not hidden, or you can figure out exactly like the code. That's what open source means, is open code. But with that comes the complexity of being able to see all that stuff, and you start messing around and suddenly it's like, I'm looking at code, I don't know what that means. Um, the downside to that as well is that there is little technical support, but there is a large community support. So like I said, there's all of those forums of artists who have had similar questions and problems to you before. So there's a lot of solutions where other people have found and that you can ask. And then closed source, which is also called propriety, which Adobe falls under, it has a lot of great features out of the box. It has awesome technical support. You can call, email, they'll be able to pull up your account and figure out what's going on. The downside is the cost of it. And that is also subject to change. They could change that at any time or change what your subscription covers. There's limited customization as compared to open source, where you can kind of mix and match and add things and take out things. You're kind of set with what the application out of the box is supposed to give you. And then there's also a lack of transparency. You can't see what's going on under the hood and um, you can look at some of that going through your privacy agreements and stuff like that, but that's very long and it's very detailed and it's jargon that it's not easy for you to understand. Um, so we will start with talking about this analogy that I came up with. So, open source is like your friend who runs a bakery, and they give you this fresh baked piece of bread, and they also give you the recipe with it. So, you know exactly what goes into it. And they say next time that they make it, you can kind of make something together and they'll work on you with it. So you can go on your baking forums and, be like, hey, what's an awesome kind of bread to make a sandwich with? And you can find solutions and then you can go and workshop with that and make your own. So it is very community based, accessible, and customizable. Now, closed source is like buying your bread from a grocery store, and they have a lot of choices, but you are limited by those choices. You can't go to Wonder Bread and be like, hey, this is cool, but could it maybe have sesame seeds on the top? They'd probably say no. It's easy to pick up. You can only enjoy it if you pay for it. So it's not like you can't just start eating bread at the store. um, but yeah, so that's kind of a different way to look at open source and closed source. So let's look at Adobe programs again. So I these are the prices as of yesterday, whenever I updated this. So Photoshop is $22.99 per month, and that is the cost if you agree to pay it for a full year, which is 263.88 for one whole year. Um, you only have that if you um, if you pay for it for the month. So as soon as that subscription ends, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Spotify and Netflix, as soon as that month is up, you no longer have access to any of your movies or shows or anything that you have saved. So same thing works with Photoshop. If you drew something in Photoshop and it expires, your subscription expires, you can't even open up your documents to look at them or resave them to a different format. Um, and that is the price for only Photoshop. Adobe Illustrator is also $22.99. InDesign is also $22.99. So you start stacking those and it starts getting pretty expensive month to month. They also have an option to purchase the suite, but that is $69.99 per month. And that is $779.88 per year for all of the programs. So the way that I like to describe it is that subscription, you don't own the program, you're just leasing permission to use it. So that's the benefits with open source programs is that you have these and you don't have to pay any prices for them. Once you download it, you own it. So both Krita and GIMP are good options for Adobe Photoshop, and I would even say a little bit better if you're looking for a application to do illustrations on because they are illustration forward instead of Photoshop being photo editing forward. Inkscape, which is comparable to Adobe Illustrator, and Blender, which I hadn't been as familiar with, but it has a lot of different things that you can do with it. You can do 3D modeling for animation, rendering, video game stuff. It also has video editing software in there as well. So there's a handful of programs that you can use. Other free options that aren't open source would be Procreate, which you would be able to access if you had an iPad. You could just download it from the App Store. And Canva, I think, is a good all-around beginner program if you want to start building multiple different kinds of things. You have templates that you can jump off from, but I will say that the it is significantly limited with your access if you have a free account. Um, so now let's move to the second portion, which is protecting your art. Okay, there he goes. Oops, too far. Yes. So let's talk about plagiarism. Definition of plagiarism is the act of stealing the words or ideas of another. It can be intentional or unintentional. I think for the most part, everyone kind of falls into the unintentional category, more so just because people don't understand necessarily what plagiarism means. um, Whenever you think about plagiarism, you think of some evil character who's like, I'm gonna profit off of this, or I'm trying to do this thing maliciously. But for the most part, people just genuinely don't know what is considered plagiarism. So, art plagiarism is referring and copying an artwork and claiming it to be your own. A very common form of this is online. If you see a cool design of something and someone's like, hey, I want to see that on X, I want to see that on a shirt, I want to see that on a mug. And then if you print that, that is also plagiarism. And improper citing also falls under that category. So if you change your new header image to a cool picture of a dragon that you saw online or something, and then you don't cite it, and then people are like, hey, where'd you get that from? That's still technically plagiarism. So intentional is what it sounds like. I want to make money off of this, and there's the guy again. So I have a little bit of a plagiarism example. This is a developing thing, just happened August 24th, 2025, with a local artist and Garfield. So there's this online artist named Binky and Crumb who makes a lot of art that is based off of medieval marginalia, so old drawings and illustrations and things, and kind of modernizing them in a silly, goofy way. And then Garfield, you know, the lasagna enthusiast who hates Mondays, who's been around for a long time. um, and on August 27th, Garfield posted this image on a 4 image slide and captioned it simply, These deserve to be in a museum. And it got 45.5 thousand likes with no artist credited. Um, so this is kind of what the image looks like. There's speculations going on. I don't want to talk about a lot of them. People are like, it could be AI, it could not be. But the artist actually responded, and so they had their posts of their own, and they showed the side by side and even the overlay of how similar the art is to one another. And I kind of took captions or little clips from their caption, and to simplify, they basically said, you know, art isn't being inspired by other people. I don't have the corner market on illustrations of medieval art. We're all being inspired by each other, but it kind of sucks that this was a sponsored post and they made money off of this and they didn't give credit to anyone, specifically their little toesies. But I mean, there's a lot of similarities in the overlay and the text choice. Um, like I said, that's just an example. I'm not making any kind of claims. Um, so we'll move on to the next portion, which is about AI training, which kind of ties into the speculations of that possibly being AI in the last one. Um, so basically, how AI is trained is by learning different styles and techniques based off artists' work. So it basically chews up and processes a bunch of art that it pulls from any publicly available images online, as you can see over here and what data is available. AI models are designed to copy and replicate. They cannot create anything that is new, which I also learned recently. Earlier this year, there's been an issue with a lot of AI art having like a yellow tint to it, which has been a little bit odd. I wish that I put some up here for like a demonstration, but basically what has been causing it is that it's been processing its own images that then just like the yellow tint is just adding. So it's kind of like um, in the real world, how paper ages over time, AI images are aging as they generate more, some of them, depending on where it's coming from. But it is specifically when it's generating from itself, which is why it's so important for AI to partner with other. sources to try to pull in more art, which Meta actually did in their new privacy policy as of June 24, 2024. They allow data scraping from their site. So if you post your art on Instagram or Facebook, it could possibly be used to scrape if you don't opt out, which I will talk about a little bit later. So what can we do? All right. So art safety. Where do you share? Stay up to date on the policies of the sites that you post to, and also just stay up to date in general on current AI developments. Post to non-public sites or make your accounts private. I know banishing Instagram and Facebook isn't realistic, um, but submit opt-out requests when you can. There are plenty of tools to do that. I found a really simple one on MIT Tech Review. If you just look up opt-out request AI for art, you will find a plethora of different articles. Another tip is think about how you share. Make sure that you're using watermarks and signatures so that people can't take them and repost them somewhere else and there be confusion about who it belongs to. I say lower resolution images because you don't necessarily need to upload a image that could be plastered on a billboard on your portfolio website. A smaller resolution image will do just fine and still show the complexity and detail of that image. If you do have a portfolio, limit how you can also limit how people interact with your art. So you can remove saving options by not allowing right click and stuff like that. So another thing for art safety, University of Chicago has actually been developing tools to protect creatives against the invasive use of AI. Back in March 2022, they created a process that's very similar to watermarking. Um, that will basically put a watermark over your art that is a defensive approach to put up barriers to keep them from scraping your art. Nightshade, which was developed in January 2024, is an offensive measure which works similarly as it goes over your art and it isn't visible to the eye, but it actually works as a poison to future generative production. So if you see the image on the left, we have the very left portion is the image before it started through the process, and each box is the step along the way, so that the very right it is 500 processes through, and it just kind of looks like static on a TV screen. So that was kind of a lot of stuff to go over. We went over open source and closed source, and we talked about free programs. And we also talked about being mindful of where and how we post and staying up to date with the digital landscape. Thank you so much for joining us here for this How To Tuesday. Make sure to tune in next week where Rose will actually be going over open educational resources at Park, which you can register at park.libcal.com.